Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hope McManus, and I will be joining you today for Peninsula Canada's Wednesday live Facebook chat. So today we're going to majorly focus around a lot of the health and safety topics that are coming up with respects to COVID. We've had a lot of exciting announcements come up from the Ontario government as well as BC and Alberta. So very excited to speak about those today. And before we get into it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a couple minutes for individuals to join the Facebook Live session. So we'll just wait a few more minutes before we get into the nitty-gritty health and safety portion of it. It's a very exciting time as we talk about businesses starting to reopen, but the measures that we certainly need to put in place. So, as we're waiting here, what I will do, for those of you that have joined so far, I'll go into a little bit of myself, where I came from, what I'm doing today, as we wait for our audience to jump on. So my name is Hope McManus, and I am the head of health and safety for Peninsula Canada. Peninsula Canada is in its infancy in Canada. We have just put boots on the ground in 2017 and had exponential growth 2017 onwards to today, where we are currently in Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto servicing clients. Worldwide, Peninsula is in Canada, Australia, and Europe, continues to grow. In total, we have about 80,000 clients that we service, which is pretty fantastic. In Canada alone, we service 4,000 clients, which is consistently growing. So Peninsula Canada is essentially a health and safety and HR consulting company where we help small to medium-sized businesses with any HR and health and safety needs. Typically, it is very much been involved with the topic of COVID when we're speaking about recalls, working with current legislations, changing legislations, whether it be federal or provincial. So we guide employers on how to incorporate those measures into their small and medium-sized businesses. So that's a little bit about Peninsula. Myself, I have had the opportunity to have a great amount of experience working in the health and safety industry for quite a long time. I began my career working at Air Canada, on the front lines with all of our staff, learning about risk assessments, learning how it affects employees in their day-to-day, and how to support employees when we're talking about health and safety, while making sure that we deliver the vision. So I was able to gain a lot of experience and knowledge from working with Air Canada for many years. And I was able to also work with an engineering firm called WSP, where I worked as a health and safety advisor in many years ago, just learning about how health and safety essentially works when you're talking with clients and engineering and the many different ways that we need to look at health and safety. So from a federal aspect to a provincial aspect, it has definitely given myself the opportunity to happily be in the role I am today, supporting small and medium-sized businesses. So with that being said, let's talk about small and medium-sized businesses. Small and medium-sized businesses make up the majority of our Canadian economy, and that's something that not a lot of people know. It's very important that, we are here to support them, and it's, nothing less than obvious that our small and medium-sized businesses have been through something truly traumatic, and it's going to take time to rebuild from that. So before I go into, a lot of the Q&A and open the floor up to questions, I'll give you an update of what's been going on with each province, and then we'll get into, any questions that may come up. If you do have a question, what we would love you to do is just type it into the comment bar, and I'll take a look over back and forth and just see, we'll answer questions while I go through. what's going on with the government, what's going on federally, provincially, and the measures that you should be putting into place for your workforces. So I have a first question come through, so I will handle that first question. So the government, from Supriya, so the government is making lots of suggestions as to what we want, as to what we need to do, and what we should do to keep everyone safe. But what if we can't do everything on the should do list? It's a great question. So essentially what I'm going to say is, under the provincial, federal, any legislation act, when you're talking about health and safety, what you are speaking about and what your duty is as an employer is to provide a safe workplace for your employees. And it's as much as reasonably practical. So unto the point of undue hardship, we really have to make sure as an employer you're taking all the appropriate measures in place to ensure that you have a safe workplace for employees to return to. Now, with COVID, it's a little bit different. We're in a situation that we have not been in yet. So typically, we have health and safety legislation. Sometimes it takes years to pass. Sometimes it takes, decades to come into effect. And when we're talking about legislation, you'll see different verbiages talking about shall versus should. When a legislation says should, it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation on best demonstrated practice. When a legislation says shall, you have to follow that. It's not a nice to do, it's a need to do. So what you need to ask yourself, if you're in the situation, you're setting up your workplace, you need to ask yourself, am I doing all I reasonably can to protect my workers with respects to COVID? So have you thought about engineering controls? Have you taken an honest look at your workplace and said, yes, I have put the appropriate measures in place to make sure that my employees are safe, and not only my employees, but my customers. So these are definitely things that you want to take into consideration when you're saying, I can't do it. If you can't do the full reign, typically the good news when we are talking about COVID guidelines is, they're pretty straightforward. And yes, there may be some creativity that's involved in implementing these measures, but it's an opportunity for all of us to think outside the box. So the guidelines typically put out, by the World Health Organization, by the Center for Disease Control, federally, provincially, and worldwide, really enhance on, a few major things. And the first thing is social distancing. So how are you incorporating social distancing into your work environment? Social distancing is a means to protect people because we know that COVID is a highly transmissible disease. So the reason why we have a 2-meter distance rule, especially in Canada, is that we believe that if you are in that proximity, you lessen the likelihood of transmission of COVID. Now, will that transmission eliminate absolutely fully? No, but it's a means to control the potential of COVID transmitting onto another person. So this is why the government is really essentially saying, make sure that you follow certain guidelines with respect to social distancing, hygiene, respiratory hygiene, hand hygiene, washing your hands, coughing into your elbow when you sneeze, staying away. These are measures which one would consider reasonable when putting it into your workplace. While we wish that we could eliminate COVID, we're just not there yet. We don't have a vaccination to, take it, put it under control. So then through the hierarchy of control, we have to look at other ways to reduce the risk of COVID in the workplace to something which health and safety professionals deem as low as reasonably possible. So while we can't eliminate it, while we may not necessarily be able to substitute, this hazard for another hazard, what's the next thing that we can do? Well, the next thing that we can do is we can look at engineering controls, and we can look at safe work procedures, and as a last resort, we can look at PPE. And that's typically what the government's asking you to do. The government is asking you to look at engineering controls, which is, when we are talking about social distancing, if you can't social distance your employees from clients or customers, when you're talking about transactions and people working at cash registers, putting up plexiglass is an amazing example of an engineering control that would be a measure you would put in place to protect your workers. And again, that's in instances where you're not always going to be able to protect social distancing. Engineering controls, in assistance as well with safe work procedures are known to be a lot more effective in reducing the risk. When I'm talking about safe work procedures, it's essentially changing the way that your employees work, and communicating that change to your employees to make sure that they're clear of it, and that you consistently reassess it. And as a last resort, which is ironically typically the forefront, is making sure that you incorporate personal protective equipment. So when you talk about having a safety professional, when you ask a safety professional about personal protective equipment, it's typically known as the least effective control method when you are trying to control a hazard in the workplace. Personal protective equipment is there as a last resort where you cannot eliminate the hazard, you cannot substitute it, you have no engineering controls, you have limited safe work procedures. So while masks, gloves have been at the forefront, typically, it's the last thing that we should be looking at. We need to be looking at other things ahead of that. So I know that's a very long-winded answer, Supriya, but I hope that answers a little bit as much. I think especially with the COVID guidelines, the government is saying, you should be doing this to protect your workers. You should be having these things in place. And with respects to COVID, generally, those workarounds are typically pretty straightforward to put into play. But if you have any hesitations, or if you are unsure about how to exactly incorporate that in, please give us a call. Peninsula Canada has advisors available for our clients and even prospects when we're calling in to assist you in taking a look at your workplace and knowing essentially, okay, this is social distancing, but how do I put it into place? And how do I make sure that I train my employees that they know? Because in many of your workplaces, you have a lot of employees that, are not always there every single day. So we have to make sure that any assessments that you are doing are always refreshed to keep with the latest legislation that's popping up and the latest legislational changes that are happening, not only with COVID, but health and safety in general. So, I'm just going to go into a little bit of an update about the recent news that we have received about the developments of COVID and how it's working in Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. So British Columbia has been a lot more progressive. However, please keep in mind that British Columbia also did go into a state of emergency before most of the other provinces, which is why they're given the allowance to basically move forward and relax their restrictions that they have in place, and therefore allow more businesses to open up with enhanced protocols. So BC is right now at a point where they're talking about opening it into phase 3. Phase 3 is around the June and September mark for them, but that's on the condition that the conditions continue and the cases continue to come in at a lower number. So some examples of more workplaces that are going to be able to open up in BC, hotels and resorts we're talking about movies and symphonies, we're talking about films, we're talking about camping, campgrounds, and then high school and elementary schools. Although high school and elementary schools more partially. So as they move into stage 3, which again is no set date, but it looks promising that they will move into this one within the next few weeks or month, just depending on the case numbers that are coming in. More workplaces are going to have to be prepared with looking at, what's my back to work guide? Because really at this point, you want to make sure that you're developing training for your employees. Because if you're not opening up tomorrow, you will be opening up, in the coming weeks. So take the time to prepare your employees now, rather than waiting until you've got the green light from the government and then having to delay your opening another week or so because you still have to train employees. So now is a perfect time to make sure that you have that stuff that you need. So when you are given the green light by, your governing body, you can simply progress into that next stage under enhanced protocols. So Alberta currently is looking at moving into stage 2, and that would be effective June 12th, which is fantastic for Alberta. I know they were in stage 1 for a little bit more of a longer time. So, interestingly enough, Alberta has some locations that are actually giving out free masks 4 free masks if you walk into an A&W or a McDonald's. So that's really how the Alberta government seems to be approaching the COVID-19 issue. Keep in mind, every single government will be a little bit different in how they're approaching it. So, as we go through this unprecedented time, again, it really allows us to have to be a little bit creative here in how we want to tackle it. So Alberta seems to be definitely promoting the mask method, and that could be based on the information that Dr. Theresa Tam had put forth in the past couple of weeks, where she had mentioned the usage of masks. Masks are to be used as an added layer of protection when you do fear that social distancing may be encroached on. So, for example, what do I mean by that? Social distancing could be encroached when you're in the grocery store and you have someone behind you that forgets they're supposed to be social distancing, so they come a little close, and therefore, they may break the social distancing rule. So examples of that, so places of the public where it's very hard for us to control others' actions, we want to make sure that we're taking, those precautions, and that's where we deem masks beneficial, right? Because masks are there to protect others. They're there to protect, and inhibit your droplets expelling out into, that threshold that the CDC had mentioned of the transmission, the 2-meter rule. So Ontario had some very exciting news. Ford made an announcement on Monday this week. Premier Doug Ford made an announcement at 1 o'clock speaking about the Ontario progressions. So Ontario essentially is there to be able to progress in certain parts to stage 2, which is exciting. This is effective Friday at 12:01 a.m. that we'll have a lot of our workplaces start to open. And, whether that's hair salons, whether we're talking about swimming pools or splash pads, these are exciting times for businesses. However, the caveat to Ford's announcement is there are certain regions that are not going to be able to simply open at this point. And that is simply for the fact that the case numbers have not reduced to an acceptable amount by the public health unit. And as a result, we are going to have to wait to be assessed. So once those numbers have reduced, we will have other regions in Ontario start to reopen. And currently the regions that do remain in stage 1 would be Ontario, would be Toronto, would be Durham, would be Peel, York region. Those are areas that unfortunately will have to stay into the stage 1. However, next week, if we do have an announcement Monday that gives these regions the ability to move into stage 2, then by Friday, your businesses should be able to open at 12:01 a.m., which is very exciting. And that's why it's very important to start taking a look at essentially, what measures you have to be putting in place. So that's where we are from a provincial aspect, Canada aspect. We have a lot of news coming through from, the federal, Justin Trudeau just talking about essentially, the government funding relief, which is fantastic. But we have a very big focus on provinces really speaking about, a lot of more added health and safety measures. So a really good question from Christina came in is, should I be taking my employees' temperatures? So it's a good question, Christina. So before I answer this question, what we want to keep in mind are a couple things. So the first thing is, with COVID-19, what you have to remember is that COVID-19, a person who is currently a carrier of the disease may not necessarily always be displaying symptoms, or there could be an absence of certain symptoms that are historically known to be classified as COVID. So you could potentially have a person in the workplace that could have COVID, however, their temperature comes back as normal. So, it is a way. It's not going to be the end all be all to take someone's temperature and measure them. What I would recommend that you do is that if you are using that as a measure to take someone's temperature, what I would recommend is making sure that they have a consent form. Because when you're taking a person's temperature and you are getting their medical information, which would be the which would essentially be the temperature. That's typically medical information that unless you have authorization, we shouldn't necessarily be looking at that. So unless you have a certain device that's not going to give, it's either going to give you a green light or a red light, I would just tread a little bit warily on that. Instead, the best course of action in our opinion is to really look at and say, what can we do before the employee shows up to the workplace? What are the measures that we can take to get ahead of this? And that's what we're going to have to do with COVID, is we're going to have to continuously work to get ahead of it. So what does that mean? And what are the tools? What are the tools that we can give you? So a really good adaptation, which a lot of businesses are starting to take on, which we have started providing businesses, are health screening questionnaires. So a health screening questionnaire is something that you want to provide to your employee before they're attending their shift. This could be on a piece of paper. It could be in an app. It could be really in any, whether it's electronic or physical. It's a form that's going to allow them to answer a yes or no to whether they have symptoms or they have been in contact with a positive case and or someone who has displayed symptoms within the past 14 days that may be in relation to COVID-19. And that's, when we're talking about a means of preventative measures, that's a way of getting ahead of it. We want to really get ahead of it and, not have to worry about, waiting until they're at the workplace. So those are things that we do have as tools, having them fill out a questionnaire, making sure that you keep that questionnaire confidential because it is something that will have sensitive material in it. So having that stored in a controlled place, whether it's a closed office, etc., anything you find that works for you would be, a suggested approach. I know that in our Bright HR app that we have at Peninsula Canada, we do have this form available too. And another note, while we're talking about temperatures, something that may be running through your mind is also taking clients' temperatures, customers' temperatures. You may have already been in a situation where you are getting your temperature taken if you are going into a store. What we also have is a client, patient, customer questionnaire that they can fill out as well. So if you are taking this measure, if you're looking at taking it that measure, yes, it's not a no that you can't do it. It's definitely a tool that you can use. Just know that it will not be the safeguard. But I also recommend coupling that with a questionnaire. So whether you're dealing with staff or whether you're dealing with customers, do both. I think that would be beneficial for you in terms of protecting your business as well. And that way is you have more of a paper-based trail. Safety professionals like to work on paper-based trails. When we're talking about MOL, Ministry of Labor, WorkSafe BC, Alberta governing bodies, we really have to make sure that we have the documentation to back us up. So if you have an MOL inspector come in and they are asking you questions about the precautions that you have taken to protect your employees and your customers from COVID, they most certainly are going to ask for the documentation to refer to. And if you don't have suitable documentation, what may happen is they could provide you with an order or they could provide you with an entire work stoppage. Some very important figures that did come out in this past week's press conference just from Ontario is, there are 500 inspectors out working with the Ministry of Labor to be in workplaces to ensure that COVID protocols are being followed. And of those 500 inspectors, about 10,000 inspections were done. So the 10,000 inspections that were done, over half employers received orders. So 5,500 employers received orders and 22 workplaces were shut down. So essentially what that means is that when you're getting an order, it means that there's something that you haven't complied with. So that's something that you want to take into consideration. So there's a question that has come in from Lulu. So Lulu, what if an employee refuses to let me take their temperature? Can I refuse to let them work? It's a very good question, Lulu. So if an employee refuses to get their temperature taken, we're finding it's a very unprecedented time where essentially, at the end of the day, safety is trumping a lot of measures in place. So if you purely have this temperature control measure in place to protect, your staff and customers, that may be, and if they have signed a consent form, that could be more of a HR issue that you want to deal with at this point. As long as your goal is to protect your worker safety and your employees' safety, that's what you have to make sure that you're referring to. Because if you do have a work refusal happen and MOL walks in, that is something that you can refer to as a control measure in your workplace to protect your, like I said, your employees and your employees, staff, and clients walking in. So just make sure that if it gets to that point, you do show that you've done your due diligence in other ways as well. But it is good to, before it gets to that point where they are refusing to get their temperature taken, make time to educate them on why you're doing this. Because I have found in cases where an employee does not want to be necessarily safety compliant, taking the time to educate them on why you're putting this measure in place typically solves the problem in itself. And telling them, it's important that we keep your safety number one, your workers, your colleagues' safety number one, and our client safety number one. And, typically when we have employees that understand that is when we can move into the next level. And really make sure that and they understand, and that problem will resolve itself. However, like I said, if it gets into a work refusal situation, you have to make sure that you're saying that this is part of a control measure you're putting into place with respects to COVID. And the good news is that typically there has been a lot of work refusals coming through with respects to COVID. However, fortunately, a lot of the work refusals have been deemed to be actually not unsafe work. And when it is deemed not unsafe work, they're typically ordered back to work, and they're ordered to follow the control measures in place. And that kind of actually ties into the next question that Gemma has raised. So, hi Gemma, thank you for the question. Can an employee refuse to come to work because they think it is unsafe? So, just going into what I had spoken to before, not to rehash it too much, but it's very, very important when we're talking about work refusals. Many work refusals that I have dealt with are simply a means of educating and informing and making sure you've done your due diligence as an employer. And typically when an employee is work refusing, they essentially feel that you have not done your due diligence as an employer to keep them safe. That's why it's important to go through those steps before. So what you want to do is, you could put all the controls in place, but if you don't educate your employees, that may lead to a work refusal. And this is why they could be saying it's unsafe, because they may not know the work refusal, the work safe procedures that you have put in place to actually protect them. And it's about relationship building. So if we get to a point where we have someone who's refusing the right to work, you have to go through the process. So if it's an official work refusal, the first thing to remember is that the employee actually has to be at the place of work to refuse. You cannot work refuse from home. You have to be at the place, and simply because you have to be able to point out what the hazard is in the workplace. So once the employee is there and officially exercising their right to refuse dangerous work, it goes into the section where, the first point of resolution is the supervisor and the employee working together to try to resolve the problem. So it could simply be a matter of the employer taking into account an opportunity to improve, or it could be, the employer educating the staff member on actually what the measures are in place. And this is the time where, like I said, you want to work with your employees because they may have, a relatively good idea to help protect the workplace even more. And they have to be part of the solution too. So if they see that there's another possible way of protecting workers, then we want to have them bring it up. Keep in mind that they are your front line, so they are going to be exposed to more of the daily hazards. So in turn, they are going to know a lot more about the hazards they're necessarily exposed to, opposed to someone who's not always on the front line and not always in the store and not always in the dentist, physio, whatever place of work that they're in. So listen to them, try to work with them, work together to try to build a resolution. If that doesn't work, what you want to do is you have to move to the next level. So depending on your workplace, you're either going to have a health and safety representative or you're going to have a joint health and safety committee. So a health and safety representative or a joint health and safety committee has to come into play if you both have spoken with each other, you haven't resolved it, you then have to move to step two. And step two is involving your health and safety rep or your joint health and safety committee. And you're working with each other and really saying, your health and safety rep is giving you additional measures to try to mitigate, educate, and resolve the issue. As a last resort, if this is unsuccessful, what you need to do is you need to move to the next step, step three. So step three is going to involve an enforcing authority coming in and really educating and understanding, doing an investigation to deem whether the work is safe or unsafe. And as I was mentioning before, the good thing is, a lot of work refusals that are coming through are actually being deemed as safe because employers are putting the proper measures in place. It's a means of educating staff. What's important to know too is that you have to make sure that risk is reduced to something that would not expose them to anything more than being in the general public. Walking down the street, for example, would expose them. So you have to make sure that the measures are reasonable on both sides. So the employee has to understand that sometimes the course of work they are doing may put them at a risk, but it's our risk, it's our job to make sure that we reduce that risk to something in the safety world that's called as low as reasonably possible. A question came in from Nicole. Hi, Nicole. So what if a business is a small business and the owner wears all the hats, no health and safety team? So typically it depends on the size of the business, Nicole. So you should, and depending on the numbers, if it's 5 or less, you should have a health and safety rep. So that's the process. And whether you're in Ontario, Alberta, or BC, you should really have a health and safety rep in the workplace. And the health and safety rep needs to work with the employer to make sure that you have the proper measures in place. And having the proper measures in place, not just limited to COVID, is really going to talk about, do you have the postings in place? Taking a look at the work that you guys are doing every day and saying, okay, based on the work that you're doing every day, what is the health and safety training that you require? And sometimes it can be very basic training. Sometimes it could just be the health and safety awareness training. That's predominantly in Ontario, or it could be a whole slew of training just based on the job hazard analysis that you're doing. So you really want to make sure that, it is good that you have a health and safety representative if you have a smaller size businesses. And they should be working with the employer to help them make sure that they have the proper measures in place. So that's something I would look at. I would go back and ask your business and see how that's set up, and go from there. So really, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that all workplaces have the measures in place that are applicable to the act that they're applicable with. So the Ontario regs. If you're construction, if you're dental, you have to make sure that you're following the applicable health and safety regulations, and that's pretty much the most important thing, is to make sure that you are following the proper regulations. So Paulette is asking a question, and I will read it out loud. So we have provided masks and shields to our employees. We were providing them to customers. However, many people were taking them and not wearing them in our place of business. Can we refuse someone entry if they will not wear a mask? And can we charge customers for masks? So the last part of the question, can you charge customers for masks? That's entirely up to you. There's no hard and fast rule on whether you can or not. I have seen some businesses just deny entry to people who don't have masks. I have seen some businesses give masks away for free, and I have seen some businesses have them available for purchase. So it really depends on how you want to set it up. It seems that a lot of businesses are trying to just proactively give them out. With respects to if you're talking about customers not wearing masks in your place of work, in your place of business, you have to remind the thing is, when customers enter your workplace, when they enter your workplace, they really have to make sure they are following the control measures that you have in place, and that's a condition of them entering it. So if they are not wearing the mask and not respecting social distancing, well, then at the end of the day, they're potentially putting your employees, your other clients and customers, and yourself at risk. So that would be something that you might want to talk to the customer about, or say, it's the only way that you can enter the building is really, when you're wearing a mask. And, there hasn't been a hard and fast rule from the government at this point making it mandatory for businesses to have masks. However, there hasn't been any enforcing bodies that are really taking the hard stance and saying, no, you cannot force customers to wear masks. So, I can say that if I had those measures in my place of business, and we had asked them to respect the mask rule, and they weren't respecting it, like I said, a conversation with that customer to say, we do have to enforce the mask rule while you are in our store. We appreciate that. We have to keep the integrity of health, the health and safety integrity of myself, my customers, and our staff. So that's how I'd really approach that, Paulette. I know it's always a tough conversation to have, but just reminding them that safety is number one. So Nicole, I see you have come back with another question. So if it's a smaller thing, Nicole, if you have elected to be the health and safety representative, that will work as well. That's okay, because you are a much smaller business. So what I would recommend is just make sure that, you do not need to join health and safety committee. You are, a smaller business. So just make sure that whoever it is that is elected to be the health and safety representative, and because like I said, you're smaller, you can certainly take on that role if you would like. Then make sure that you have the appropriate postings, make sure that you're following the appropriate procedures, you're still conducting the workplace inspections. And if you have any other questions regarding the specifics of your workplace, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after the call and after the live webinar session, and we can kind of go into a little bit more of the specifics of your workplace, and we can help you kind of guide through what other measures that you need to take into place, especially, just so we can get a better understanding of how exactly your workplace is set up. So just while we're waiting for some more questions coming in, I'll go over some considerations that we want to take into place when you are setting up your workplace. So setting up your building, setting up your office, setting up your restaurant, your salon, etc., getting you back into business, you want to take into account a few different things. So when you're talking about, the first thing that you want to take into account is, have you taken a look at the building? So have you taken a look at the high touch points? Have you taken a look at the office flow? Are there multiple points of exit and entry? If there are multiple points of exit and entry, is there a way that you can control who's coming in one side and who's going out the other? It really depends on how your place is set up. If you have, simply one door that's in and out, it's a really good idea to have one door dedicated to people coming in and one door dedicated to people going out, to allow for employees to follow through with the proper flow. And the reason why we want a proper flow is to reduce people crossing each other, therefore encroaching on the social distancing aspect. What you want to make sure that you're doing too is that if you're getting ready to reopen your building, essentially what you want to do is make sure that your fire systems are working, make sure that your basic building code is up to standard, the safety measures are in place, you've got the exits back working in order. If it's been shut down for a while, you have to make sure that's up and running. And also what you want to take a look at is your HVAC system. So you might be in a situation where you're not necessarily the building operator, you're just renting a space. That's why it's very important to link in with the building operator to see the measures that they have taken into consideration. So in most cases, the building operator will generally have enhanced HVAC systems where they have talked about enhancing the airflow, making sure there's more fresh air coming in, more frequent filter changes. Those are measures that they're taking into consideration. If you're in an office building, they're looking at elevators, maximum capacities in elevators, high touch points. If your staff are scanning and coming through a turnstile, things like that. Those are ones that you want to take into consideration, but also link in with the building operator because they're also they're putting those measures in place. Your job is just to make sure that you're educating the staff on the measures that the building operator is putting into play. And it's very important that you do that as well, just to ensure, like I said, the ease of communication between your staff and yourself. And it kind of goes into my next point when we are talking about communication with staff. Please, again, make sure the lines of communication are open. So do a risk assessment. Take a look at your workplace. Take a look at the ways that you're conducting businesses. The certain tasks that people are doing, perhaps you can think about doing them a little bit differently. Instead of handling cash, look about contactless transactions. Instead of, having someone go and meet them right at the door, have a preset time for everyone to be met. Try to reduce touch points as much as you can. And communicating all of this to your staff is the most important thing, because you could have the measures in place, but if you don't have them following it, well, then it just makes it null and void. And that's the same thing that happens when, you have an MOL inspector walking in. You could have the procedures in place, but in order to be compliant, you have to be following through on the procedures that are in place. That's just as important as having them, out and posted and available. So just make sure that they know that. Just make sure there's always a way of, communicating with staff, and have an open door policy. Make sure it's always two-way communication. So you have the clear policy, but if there's anything that comes up, have a two-way communication straight with them so they know. And this also goes for clients too, because clients want to make sure that your business is safe with regards to reopening. So when you're speaking to clients, when you're sending them emails, when you're sending them, any means of communication on social media, you have to make sure that they're aware of the measures that you have in place prior to them visiting the facility. And that's key in making sure it's successful. And that could be staggering wait times. It could be asking them to wear masks so that they're absolutely clear, the clients that are subscribed to you, that they know the proper procedures in place. So that would be something that you want to take into consideration. So Gemma has a question: what do we do if someone has had COVID but they say they are recovered? So if someone says to you in a workplace, I had COVID, it's very important to immediately stop what you're doing and make sure that you're performing basically a screening of them. So it's important to know the date. It's important to know if they were diagnosed by a public health professional. And by that public health professional, you can also ask to make sure that they have clearance to come back to work. Typically we use the 14-day rule. I'm sure that we've all seen this, that there is a 14-day rule that we want to wait to make sure that someone doesn't have symptoms or someone hasn't had it. But typically the public health unit or their local public health unit will let them know when they are in the clear. And you can absolutely request, medical clearance. Just keep in mind when you are requesting that medical clearance that it's not going to essentially have medical information on it, and that's just for their own protection. So it will essentially have to them, this person is clear to come back to work effective June 11th, 2020. So yes, you can absolutely do that. Keep in mind, if it was something that's 3 months ago, obviously that's a large amount of time has passed. But if you feel like it would be prudent to get that medical clearance to have them return to work, then you can absolutely proceed with doing so. Cassidy White, another question: are they really checking all businesses? Will we get a warning that they are coming? So, Cassidy, great question. So reality is, yes, they are checking a lot of businesses. I was as a health and safety professional, I was very surprised to see the numbers that they had released just in Ontario with regards to how many inspectors they have dispatched. In addition to that, they have a COVID advisory committee, which really, in essence, means that they are taking this very, very seriously. So yes, they will be out inspecting. We can expect that the inspections will double in numbers over the next coming months just to make sure businesses are compliant. And it really depends. Sometimes you'll get notice, but sometimes you won't. Really depends on the inspector. And you may have a past relationship with an inspector that may give you a heads up and say, hey, I'm coming Tuesday next week just to do a workplace inspection. But they do have the right to come in at any point when you're open. So that's what you have to remember. What you have to remember with that is that they have any right to come, they have every right to come in when you're open, and they have every right to give you an order, and they can shut you down. So if MOL comes in and says that you need to shut down, you need to shut down. There's no arguing with it. You need to take what they are saying from the order, comply with it, and move forward. Sometimes they'll just give you a suggestion, an observation. In best case scenario, give you an observation and say, you know what, your decal is not to the point it needs to be, or you're missing some behavioral postage. When I'm talking about behavioral postage, I'm talking about social distancing posters. How are you educating your employees and customers when they're walking in? So they may just give you a heads up and say, hey, you're missing this, get it fixed by the end of the day, and you can progress. But there's cases where you have an MOL inspector walk in and you see 30 people congregated closely, not respecting the social distancing rule, that could result in a shutdown. So you just have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared that the orders that they give you, you really need to follow through with that. And failure to follow through with that is that, it's obviously big on reputation. In addition to that, there's also a cost associated with that too. So there could be fines induced, right? And that's what we want to avoid. So if they come in, just follow through what they say. You can absolutely give us a call and we'll walk you through next steps. So what we do at Peninsula is, once you do receive that call from the MOL or that inspection, you can even call us, as MOL does show up, and we'll walk you through. If they do give you any pieces of information, if they do give you any orders, give Peninsula a call, and we have advice agents on. We've actually, we have had a high influx of calls coming in because of COVID. So we have upped our advice line participation just to make sure that we're there to be able to service all of you in the next coming months, weeks, days, as we progress through this COVID, situation and navigate it. So we are there to help you. And this goes the same thing too. If you have a work refusal and you are dealing with, going through the motions and how do I approach step 2 and have I done all I can do? We're here for, when you need to pick up the phone and say, okay, have I done all I can do? Is there anything else I really need to do here? This is what I've done so far. And then we can walk you through next steps. So next step, and we'll tell you, exactly our advice, because we're here to be your guide on the side. We're here to really help you try to, first of all, avoid any of this happening in your workplace. But if it does happen in the workplace, then we're here to, extend our hand and get you through it. We're all for supporting small, medium-sized businesses. This is what we're here to do. We want to make sure that you feel supported as well. It's very hard to navigate through this time of uncertainty. And as the government does start to loosen restrictions, as we do start to loosen restrictions, then, it will be a time where we will have to continuously work to adapt. And that's why we at Peninsula continue to stay abreast of the changes that come through from our local governing bodies. And we continue to build a relationship with the governing bodies as well, just to make sure that we know what's coming down the pipe. So we're there to help you. So another question came in from Lulu. When do you expect most businesses will have employees return to the workplace? So it's a good question, Lulu. If we are taking the regional approach, just in Ontario alone, we are looking at, if we are able to walk into stage 2 in the next coming weeks, consider a few things. So we progress into stage 2. We have a monitoring time where the government and public health are going to work together to see if cases go up or go down. So if cases are trending upwards, we could unfortunately regress into stage 1. And that's why it's very, very important for everyone to do their part to make sure that we're not regressing to higher case numbers. Because if we do regress to higher case numbers, we're essentially going into stage 1, and that's something that we ultimately all together would like to avoid. So if in Ontario alone is able to progress onwards to stage 2 in the next coming weeks, an assessment period of 2 to 4 weeks will be conducted And if we are successful in reducing the numbers over the next 2 to 4 weeks, then we will look at, the government will look at progressing into stage 3. And stage 3 is one of the final stages. However, we're not at the clear. A lot of us seem to take the perception that we're in stage 3, which essentially means, okay, we're back to normal. No, we're not back to normal. We are back to the new norm under enhanced protocols. So you'll see that more restrictions will be in place. However, as long as COVID-19 is here and there is no vaccination, we will be expected to follow through with these measures. So you can expect that the investments that you are making, whether you're talking about engineering controls and behavioral postage and hygiene, those will be something that, I expect will be in the workplace for, weeks and months to come to protect our staff and your customers. So, make sure that you're getting those posters and those signages up, and that will help make sure that we keep progressing into the new stages. It takes everyone's effort to put it into place, right? It's unfortunate that we're dealing with something that, we're working with the guidance that we do have. And, like I said, the guidance is social distancing. Think of ways that you're social distancing, hygiene measures, and education of hygiene measures, washing your hands. It seems like such a simple thing, but it's something that's seen by the CDC and World Health Organization as one of the best preventative measures of the transmission of COVID-19. And that's something that we need to continuously educate the public and our staff on. So as long as we can do a good job on doing that, we can make all means of communication open. And in the lovely world of technology that we're in, it's forced us to really take a big step and really take a big interest in using the technology as a means of communication. So, if we can start progressing into stage 3, that will be definitely our new norm. And we can expect that to be there for a while. I think as we anticipated, we have a vaccination, but it's not expected for about 12 to 18 months. And that's just the reality of the testing going on. So as long as we, invaders and don't have available that vaccination, we'll definitely have to work with the measures that we have in place and just, work the best you can. And that's where we're here to help you. And it's just important that in the coming weeks, when there are reassessments happening with regards to COVID, there will be changes. There will be the government, World Health Organization. There will be new measures that they are going to implement. And that's why it's very, very important that you need to reassess what you've put in place. Because something that we have worked with you to put in place today may be evolved and changed in a month's time. So at least what you can do is, always take a look, always do a checklist, do a walkthrough of your workplace, keep abreast of the provincial updates. We have posters, we have hygiene checklists, we have risk assessment guides, we have questionnaires available for you. So, we have all these tools available for you to take advantage of to help you get back to opening your business. I know it can be overwhelming. I think for everyone, it's probably a little bit overwhelming just in terms of how you're going to operate in a way that you've never really operated before. So that's where we want to really help you take out the guesswork, and we want to work with you to make sure that you have the tools that you need. So like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you find that you are in need of those tools. And if you do need coaching on things like toolbox sessions, when you are speaking to your staff about the measures that are in place, there's no doubt that you all have employees that bring up issues about coming into work and not wanting to come in, whether it's taking public transportation and they feel that they may be put at a higher risk because they are taking public transportation. So, we've seen an influx of questions like that come up. So that's something that you just want to keep in mind of. And those are things that we are dealing with on a regular basis that we can help you with as well. So like I said, whether it's a health and safety issue or stemming from COVID, could really relate to an HR issue that does appear, whether it's someone that has been laid off but does not want to come back to work because they feel it's unsafe. Those are things that we can walk you through, because unfortunately we are seeing a lot of these issues come up. But we want to make sure that you feel confident in terms of making sure that you have the proper documentation, that if it does come to an event where you are bringing an external body in to do an assessment, that we're there to make sure that you have that documentation to back yourself up on. And that's something that's very important for business owners. It's the heart and soul. This is something that you have taken the time to grow. You've probably put a lot of your time and energy and love into, and that's why we want to help you protect it. We're working towards the green light. We're not at the green light yet, but the past announcements are a really good positive indication that we are on our way and on the road to recovery for COVID. And having the proper measures in place are only going to help us propel into the next and the new stages. So take the time, take the advantage of it, link in with us. Please give us a call. We are here to certainly help you and walk you through this time. But look at it as, a great opportunity for us to help you be creative and really get to what you need. So we are coming up on the end of our Facebook Live webinar. We have a couple minutes left before the top of the hour. So I will just leave it open for any last minute questions. So I will kind of start my wrap up, but if you do have a question, you can post it right there. But what I would like to say is, sincerely, we are with all of you. We can appreciate the turmoil that you have experienced the past few months. We're all in the business to work to help you guys back on the mend and get into and become bigger and better from this, and be the leaders. You guys are the backbone of our economy, and we are here to give you the tools to help you continue to be the backbone of our economy. And it's very, very important that we remain here to help you. So I want to thank you all for attending the session today. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. It was very lovely to chat with all of you. Thanks to all of you who signed in to our Facebook Live webinar session. Again, my name is Hope McManus. If you feel like you need to reach out, please feel free to reach out. We'll connect you with one of our advisors. One of our moderators will connect you as well. But thank you for that. So if there are no other questions, I'm wishing that you stay safe. I'm wishing you stay well, and please have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.